Hey, church, we'll get to our Bible study here in just a moment. Just a quick reminder that this Sunday, October 25th, we will return to the building for our 9 o'clock Sunday morning worship assembly. Mask will be required, social distancing guidelines will be implemented. You should have received an email concerning those guidelines, probably even a letter through snail mail as well. Some announcements have been posted, of course, on our Facebook page. So hopefully everything will go as smoothly as possible this Sunday. Please be very patient with us, as it may take us 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get into a routine and come up with a good system to, again, be safe and get everybody in and out of our facility safely. If you do want to visit, we ask you to do that outside in the parking lot. But anyway, please keep those guidelines in mind, and hopefully we'll have a good turnout this Sunday morning when we return to the building. This past Sunday, I preached from Revelation chapters 8 and 9, focusing primarily on verses 1 through 5, where we considered God's last word on prayer. And so this evening, rather than having one longer video to be able to cover somewhat in depth the rest of chapters 8 and 9, I'm going to do two videos. We'll cover chapter 8 in this video, and then I'll post another video with some thoughts from chapter 9 and kind of a conclusion tomorrow. So hopefully, rather than having one long 30 to 35 minute video, we'll have a couple of maybe shorter videos that might be easier to watch. So let's go ahead and jump right into Revelation chapter 8. With the opening of the seventh seal, we might expect the end or some kind of culmination to Jesus opening the seven seals of the little scroll that God held in his right hand. But instead, the opening of the seventh seal introduces a second cycle of visions, which will be just a retelling or a recapitulation of the first cycle of visions, the opening of the seven seals. And this time, we'll see here in just a moment, this second cycle of visions will be introduced with the blowing of seven trumpets. This second cycle should not be seen as a chronological continuation of the first. It's not an exact retelling or an exact recapitulation of the seven seals, but again, just a more intense look of God's judgment upon evil, and particularly in the case of the seven churches of Asia, judgment upon Rome. If you go back to chapter 6 and verse 8, you'll notice that in the first cycle, with the opening of the seven seals, 1/4 of the earth's inhabitants were affected. But in this cycle, we'll see in chapter 8, verse 7, 1/3 are affected. Well, this entire unit, the blowing of the seven trumpets, extends beyond chapter 9. We'll cover chapters 10 and 11 and conclude the blowing of the seven trumpets next week. But if you have an outline in front of you, let me go ahead and kind of give you a brief outline of this entire section, again, which encompasses the blowing of these seven trumpets. Chapter 8, verses 1 through 5, the seventh seal is opened. There is silence in heaven for about 30 minutes. Again, we discussed that this past Sunday morning at the pavilion in my sermon. Chapter 8, verses 6 through 13, we read of the blowing of the first four trumpets. And like the first four seals, the first four trumpets form a concise block. They can be seen and studied together as a unit. Chapter 9, verses 1 through 12, the final three trumpets are linked by an apocalyptic term, the little word woe, W-O-E. And we'll have some more things to say about that here in a little bit. And the fifth trumpet will introduce the first woe. That's chapter 9, verses 1 through 12, and we'll discuss that tomorrow. Chapter 9, verses 13 through 21, the sixth trumpet introduces the second woe. And then, just as we had an interlude between the opening of the sixth seal and the seventh seal, there will be an interlude between the blowing of the sixth trumpet and the seventh trumpet. And again, that will be next week when we look at chapters 10 and 11. And the seventh trumpet will actually be blown in verses 15 through 19 of chapter 11, and it becomes the third woe. So there's a brief outline of where we're headed today, tomorrow, and even into next week. I don't want to say a lot about the opening of the seventh seal since we discussed it from the pulpit this past Sunday morning. I did not go in depth about the seven angels, which will blow the seven trumpets. The definite article is used before the word angel, which suggests that this group of seven angels forms or constitutes a specific group. In Jewish tradition, there were seven archangels, and a number of New Testament scholars believe that is who John is referencing here with these seven angels. They're actually named in a non-canonical book called First Enoch. In First Enoch chapter 20, those seven angels are named as Raphael, Uriel, Raguel, Michael, that we will encounter again in chapter 12 and verse 7, Sariel, Gabriel, of course the angel that appeared to Joseph and Mary in the birth of Jesus, and then finally Remiel. Regardless, seven angels are told to blow their trumpet, and later seven angels will pour out seven bowls of wrath. That will occur when we get to chapter 15. There's a lot of discussion as to the significance of trumpets. They fulfilled many functions in the Old Testament. They were used to call the Jews together to a festive assembly. They sounded every New Year's Day. They announced the accession of a king. They proclaimed war. They proclaimed warning. They celebrated victory. And of course, in the New Testament, a trump will be sounded to indicate the second coming of Jesus. Well, beginning in chapter 8 and verse 6, the first four trumpets will begin to blow. And again, these first four trumpets are one concise block. And much like the opening of the first four seals, we read about a number of natural calamities. And again, these are are warnings of impending judgment upon evil, upon the wicked, specifically upon empirical Rome. But again, they are only partial judgments because only 1/3 of the earth is affected. Hell and fire seem to be patterned after the plagues in Exodus 9. The burning mountain suggests the judgment of an evil kingdom, again, in this case, Rome. Stars that we read about here are often representative of angelic beings, which corporately represent earthly peoples and nations. The star is named wormwood, which is a Palestinian plant which yields a bitter oil and can become poisonous if drunk over a long period. Can read about wormwood in Jeremiah 9 and Jeremiah 23. So again, through the blowing of the first 4 trumpets, we see God deny the ungodly of earthly security because of their evil, because of their idolatry, and because of their mistreatment and persecution of the church, God's people. But again, because Christians bear the seal of God, they will be preserved through, not necessarily from, these natural calamities. So now we come to the blowing of the 5th trumpet in chapter 8 in verse 13. And the chapter actually concludes with an announcement of the final 3 trumpets. And John's purpose here seems to be a division to highlight the greater harshness of the remaining trumpets. An eagle was a bird of ill omen and was an appropriate harbinger of the woes to follow. We see this several times in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 28, Jeremiah 4, Jeremiah 48, Ezekiel 17, Hosea 8. This Greek word is often translated as vulture in the Septuagint, or the Greek edition of the Hebrew Old Testament. So again, announcing judgment, announcing vindication for God's people over evil. And again, the little word woe, W-O-E, it's primarily an exclamation of grief is how it is typically used. But here in Revelation and even in other portions of Scripture, particularly the prophetic literature of the Old Testament, this little word is also used as a warning of divine judgment, which of course would then bring grief for a number of people who would experience God's judgment. So there we have just a brief summary of chapter 8. And tomorrow I will post an outline for chapter 9, and we'll conclude our discussion here of at least the blowing of the first 5 trumpets or so. And again, remember this Sunday morning we return to the building. Hope to see everyone here at 9 o'clock. Have a very good and safe rest of your week.